Hello readers, welcome back to Reads with Room B with me, Room B. Today we will be continuing with our read of Oliver. Now, I have to say that I am rubbish with Roman numerals, so when I thought I was reading chapter 18 in the last video, I was actually reading chapter 19. So today's chapter is chapter 20, and I'll only be doing chapter 20 because, as you can see, I am all on my lonesome. That's because my reading companion for this book has had other obligations that meant he couldn't read with me this week. So, that being said, let's get on with our read. Chapter 20, wherein Oliver is delivered to Mr. William Sikes. When Oliver awoke in the morning, he was a good deal surprised to find a new pair of shoes with strong, thick soles had been placed at his bedside, and that his old ones had been removed. At first he was pleased with the discovery, hoping that it might be the forerunner of his release, but such thoughts were quickly dispelled on his sitting down to breakfast with the Jew, who told him, in a tone and manner which increased his alarm, that he was to be taken to the residence of Bill Sikes that night. To stop there, sir? Asked Oliver anxiously. No, my dear. Not to stop there, replied the Jew. We shouldn't like to lose you. Don't be afraid, Oliver. You shall come back to us again. Ha ha! We wouldn't be so cruel as to send you away, my dear. Oh, no. The old man, who was stooping over the fire, toasting a piece of bread, looked around as he bantered with Oliver thus, and chuckled as if to show that he knew he would still be very glad to get away if he could. I suppose, said the Jew, fixing his eyes on Oliver, you want to know what you're going to Bill's for, hey, my dear? Oliver coloured involuntarily to find that the old thief had been reading his thoughts, but boldly said yes, he did want to know. Why do you think? Inquired Fagin, parrying the question. Indeed, I don't know, sir, replied Oliver. Bah! Said the Jew, turning away with a disappointed countenance from the close perusal of the boy's face. Wait till Bill tells you then. The Jew seemed very much vexed by Oliver's not expressing any greater curiosity on the subject, but the truth is, although he felt very anxious, he was much too confused by the earnest cunning of Fagin's looks and his own speculations to make any further inquiries just then. He had no other opportunity, for the Jew remained surly and silent till night, when he prepared to go abroad. You may burn a candle, said the Jew, putting one upon the table, and here's a book for you to read till they come to fetch you. Good night. Good night, replied Oliver. The Jew walked towards the door, looking over his shoulder at the boy as he went. Suddenly stopping, he called him by his name. Oliver looked up, and the Jew, pointing to the candle, motioned him to light it. As he did so, he placed the candlestick upon the table, and saw that the Jew was gazing fixedly at him, and with lowering and contracted brows, from the darkened end of the room. Take heed, Oliver, take heed, said the old man, shaking his right hand before him in a warning manner. He's a rough man, and he thinks of nothing of blood when his own is up. Whatever falls out, say nothing, and do as he bids, mind. Placing strong emphasis on the last word, and suffering his features to gradually resolve themselves into a ghastly grin, and nodding his head, he left the room. Oliver leaned his head upon his hand when the old man disappeared, and pondering with a trembling heart on the words he had just heard. The more he thought of the Jew's admonition, the more he was at a loss to divine its real purpose and meaning. He could think of no bad object to be attained by sending him to Mr. Sikes, which would not equally be well answered by his remaining with Fagin. And after meditating for a long time, he concluded that he had been selected to perform some ordinary menial offices for the housebreaker, until another boy, better suited for the purpose, could be engaged. He was too well accustomed to suffering, for he had suffered too much where he was, to bewail the prospect of ever changing very severely. He remained lost in thought for some minutes, and then with a heavy sigh snuffed the candle, taking the book with which the Jew had given him, and began to read. He turned over the leaves, carelessly at first, but lighting on a passage which attracted his attention, and soon became intent upon the volume. It was a history of the lives and trials of great criminals, and the pages were soiled and thumbed with use. Here he read the dreadful crimes that made the blood run cold, of secret murders that had been committed by lonely waysides, and the bodies hidden away from the eyes of man in deep pits and wells, which could not keep them down, deep as they were, but had yielded them up again at last, after many years, and so mad murderers with the sight, that in their horror they confess their guilt, and yield for the gibbet to end their agony. Here, too, he read of men who, lying in their beds in the dead of night, had been tempted, as they said, and led on by their own bad thoughts to such dreadful bloodshed as it made the flesh creep and limbs quail to think of. The terrible descriptions were so real and vivid that the sallow pages seemed to turn red with gore. The words upon them to be sounded in his ears as if they were whispered in hollow murmurs by the spirits of the dead. In a paroxysm of fear, the boy closed the book and thrust it from him. And then, falling to his knees, he prayed to heaven, spare him from such deeds, and rather, too, that he should die at once than to be reserved for crimes so fearful and appalling. And by degrees he grew more calm, and besought in a low and broken voice that he might be rescued from his present dangers, and that if any aid were to be raised for a poor outcast boy who had never known the love of friends or kindred, it might come to him now, when, desolate and deserted, he stood alone in the midst of wickedness and guilt. When he had concluded his prayer, but still remained with his head buried in his hands, when a rustling noise aroused him. "What's that?" he cried, starting up, and catching sight of a figure standing by the door. "Who's there?" "Only me," replied a tremulous voice. Oliver raised the candle above his head and looked towards the door. It was Nancy. Oliver saw that she was very, very pale, and gently inquired if she were ill. The girl threw herself into a chair, with her back towards him, and wrung her hands, and made no reply. "God forgive me," she cried after a while. "I never thought of this." "Has anything happened?" asked Oliver. "Can I help? I will if I can. I will indeed." Nancy rocked herself to and fro, and caught her throat, and uttering a gurgling sound, struggling for breath, gasped. "Nancy!" cried Oliver. "What is it?" The girl beat her hands upon her knees and her feet upon the ground, and suddenly stopping, drew her shawl close around her and shivered with cold. Oliver stirred the fire, drawing up her chair close to it, as she sat there, for a little time, without speaking, but at length she raised her head and looked around. "I don't know what comes over me sometimes," she said, affecting to make herself busy in arranging her dress. "It's this damp, dirty room, I think. Now, Nolly dear, are you ready?" "Am I to go with you?" asked Oliver. "Yes, I have come from Bill," replied the girl. "You are to go with me." "What for?" said Oliver, recoiling. "What for?" echoed the girl, raising her eyebrows, and averting them again the moment they encountered the boy's face. "Oh, for no harm." "I don't believe it," said Oliver, who had watched her very closely. "Have it your way," rejoined the girl, affecting to laugh. "For no good, then." Oliver could see that some power over the girl's better feelings, and for an instant he thought of appealing to her compassion for his helpless state. But then the thought darted across his mind that it was barely 11 o'clock, and many people were still in the streets, of whom surely some might be found to give credence to his tale. As the reflection occurred to him, he stepped forward and said, somewhat hastily, that he was ready. Neither his brief consideration nor its purport was lost on his companion. She eyed him narrowly while he spoke, and cast upon him with a look of innocence which sufficiently showed that she had guessed what had been passing in his thoughts. "Hush!" said the girl, stooping over him and pointing to the door as she looked cautiously around. "You can't help yourself. I have tried hard for you, but all to no purpose. You are hedged round and round. If you are ever to get loose from here, this is not the time." Struck by the energy of her manner, Oliver looked up in her face with great surprise. She seemed to be speaking the truth. Her countenance was white and agitated, and she trembled over with very earnestness. "I have saved you from being ill-used once, and I will again. I do so now," continued the girl aloud. For those who would have fetched you, if I had not, would have been far more rough than I. I have promised you are being quiet and silent. If you are not, you will only do harm to yourself and to me too, and perhaps mean my death. See here, all I have borne for you already. As true as God sees me now, show it." She pointed hastily to some livid bruises on her arms and neck, and continued with great rapidity. "Remember this, and don't let me suffer more for you just now. I could help you. If I could help you, I would. But I have not the power. They don't mean to harm you. Whatever they make you do is no fault of yours. Hush! Every word from you is a blow for me. Give me your hand. Make haste. Give me your hand!" She caught the hand which Oliver instinctively placed in hers, and blowing out the light, she drew him in the darkness after her up the stairs. The door was opened quickly by someone shrouded in darkness, and the door was quickly closed when they passed out. A hackney cab was waiting, and with the same vehemence in which she had exhibited in addressing Oliver, the girl pulled him in with her, and drew the curtains closed. The driver wanted no directions, but lashed his horse into full speed without the delay of an instant. The girl still held Oliver fast by the hand, and continued to pour into his ears warnings and assurances that she had already imparted. All was so quick and hurried that he scarcely had time to recollect where he was, or how he came to be there, when the carriage stopped at the house to which the Jew's steps had been directed the previous evening. For one brief moment, Oliver cast a hurried glance along the emptied street, and a cry for help hung on his lips. But the girl's voice was in his ear, beseeching him in such tones of agony to remember her, that he had not the heart to utter it. And while he hesitated, the opportunity was gone, for he was already in the house, and the door was shut. "This way," said the girl, releasing her hold on him for the first time. "Bill! Hello!" replied Sikes, appearing at the head of the stairs with a candle. "Oh, it's that time of day. Come on." This was a very strong expression of approbation and uncommonly hearty welcome from a person of Mr. Sikes' temperament. Nancy, appearing much gratified thereby, saluted him cordially. "Bullseye's gone home with Tom," observed Sikes, as he lighted them up. "He'd have been in the way." "That's right," rejoined Nancy. "So you've got the kid," said Sikes, when they had all reached the room, closing the door as he spoke. "Yes, here he is," replied Nancy. "Did he come quiet?" inquired Sikes. "Like a lamb," rejoined Nancy. "I'm glad to hear it," said Sikes, looking grimly over at Oliver, "for the sake of his young carcass. Otherwise he would have suffered for it. Come here, young'un, and let me read you a lecture, which is well as got over at once." And thus addressing his new pupil, Mr. Sikes pulled off Oliver's cap and threw it in the corner, and then taking him by the shoulder, he sat himself down by the table and stood in front of the boy. "Now first, do you know what this is?" inquired Sikes, taking up a pocket pistol which lay on the table. Oliver replied in the affirmative. "Well then, look here," continued Sikes. "This is powder, and this here's bullet, and this is a little bit of old hat for wadding." Oliver murmured his comprehension at the different bodies referred to, and Mr. Sikes proceeded to load the pistol with great nicety and deliberation. "Now it's loaded," said Mr. Sikes when he had finished. Yes, sir, I see that it is, sir, replied Oliver. Well, said the robber, grasping Oliver's wrist tightly and putting the barrel so close to his temple that they touched, at which moment the boy could not repress a start. If you speak a word when you're out of doors with me, except when I make you speak, the loading will be in your head without notice. So, if you make up your mind to speak without leave, say your prayers first. Having bestowed a scowl upon the object of his warning, to increase its effect, Mr. Sikes continued, as near as I know, there isn't anybody who would be very particular in asking after you, if you was disposed of, so I needn't take this devil and all trouble to explain matters to you, if it weren't for your own good. Do you hear? The short and long of what he means, said Nancy, speaking very emphatically, that Oliver and slightly frowning at Oliver, as if to bespeak his serious attention to her words, is that if you're crossed by him in this job you have on hand, he'll prevent you ever telling tales afterwards by shooting you through the head, and will take your chances of swinging for it, as you do a great many other things in the way of business every month of your life. That's it, observed Mr. Sikes approvingly. Women can always put it in the fewest words, except when things are blowing up, and then they lengthens it out. And now that he's thoroughly up to it, let's have some supper and get a snooze before starting. In pursuance of this request, Nancy laid the cloth, and disappearing for a few minutes, presently returned with a pot of porter and a dish of sheep's head, which gave the occasion to several pleasant witticisms on the part of Mr. Sikes, founded upon the singular coincidence of Jimmy's being a cant name common to them, and also to an ingenious implement used in his profession. Indeed, the worthy gentleman, stimulated perhaps by the immediate prospect of being in active service, was in great spirits and good humour. In proof whereof it may be here remarked that he drank humorously all the beer at one draught, and did not utter, on rough calculation, more than 80 oaths during the whole progress of the meal. Supper being ended, it may easily be conceived that Oliver had no great appetite, for Mr. Sikes disposed of a couple glasses of spirits and water, and threw himself upon the bed, ordering Nancy, with many imprecations in case of failure, to call him at 5 precisely. Oliver stretched himself in his clothes, by the command of the same authority, onto the mattress on the floor, and the girl, mending by the fire, sat before it, in readiness to rouse them at the appointed time. For a long time Oliver lay awake, thinking it not impossible that Nancy might seek that opportunity of whispering some further advice, but the girl sat brooding over the fire, without moving, save now and then to trim the light. Weary with watching and anxiety, at length he fell asleep. And when he awoke, the table was covered with tea things. Sikes was thrusting various articles into the pockets of his greatcoat, which hung over the back of the chair, while Nancy was busily engaged in preparing breakfast. It was not yet daylight, for the candle was still burning, and it was quite dark outside. A sharp rain, too, was beating against the window panes, and the sky looked cloudy and black. Now then, growled Sikes, as Oliver started up, 5:30. Look sharp, or you'll get no breakfast, for it's late as it is. Oliver was not long in making his toilette, and having taken some breakfast, replied to a surly inquiry from Sikes, saying that he was quite ready. Nancy, scarcely looking at the boy, threw him a handkerchief to tie round his throats, and Sikes gave him a large rough cape to button over his shoulders. Thus attired, he gave his hand to the robber, who, merely pausing to show him, with a menacing gesture, that he had the pistol in the side pocket of his greatcoat, clasped it firmly in his, exchanged a farewell with Nancy, and led him away. Oliver turned for an instant, when they reached the door, in hope of meeting a look from the girl, but she had resumed her old seat in front of the fire, and sat perfectly motionless before it. And thus ends our chapter for today. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time when we find out what happens to Oliver. Bye for now, readers. Stay excellent. Be safe. Keep reading.